Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to another edition of Court Call with Ronnie Nunn. It's a special edition. I'm excited to bring him on here. And let's not forget, Ronnie Nunn was a referee at the NBA Hardwood for 19 years, was an administrator for 8, and then was head of officials for 5 more. So this guy knows what he's talking about. Ronnie, thanks for coming on the show and joining us.
Coach Nick, it's always a pleasure to get on this stuff and talk about officiating, which is a critical part of the game, and we should always talk about it's the third team on every court.
Absolutely. Well, this is a special edition because we're not going to talk about a rule interpretation necessarily or what happens. We're talking about the technical foul that was called on Chris Paul at a very important part of the game when they were down by 2 with 20 seconds to go. And I wanted to go through what happened and why people were so up in arms last night about this, because I think there's some important concepts we should go over.
Yeah, this is first of all, the first concept we want to go over is it a foul or not a foul, and I think that's very important. And as we run this particular sequence, you will see good idea by the Clippers to double, a perfect place to double, by the way. And you'll notice on the double team, actually 2 fouls occur. Riddick fouls him first, and Chris Paul fouls him second. But the bottom line is there's definitely a foul, and now you have a reaction that falls in the category of respect for the game behaviors. And the area here that was a problem was the clapping of hands at the official. This is not like a clap away from the official or a turn from the official. His initial thing was to clap at that person as if one would wake him up or disrespect that person's decision, when in fact this is a legitimate foul and well done. And that clap created the problem. Overt action in resentment to a call.
I agree, and it was within very close proximity. And what was interesting about this was, from a coaching perspective, I got into an argument on Twitter last night about it, was that clearly this is the kind of play where you're going to double aggressively and try to get a steal right away, but you don't mind if you take the foul because the shot clock and the game clock were too close together, and had you let them run it down, they could conceivably almost end the game. You really wouldn't have time to get much of a good shot off. So that's the thing that's so strange, was that they're supposed to be okay with taking the foul. It looked like to me that they were taking the foul, and yet he reacts that way, and it claps at him. Now, after that, what was kind of funny that we were talking about earlier was that he turns around, and the commentators made a point of saying, oh, he didn't even know he's getting a technical foul. He was turned around and muttering to himself and whatever. What were your thoughts on that action?
Well, he knew as soon as he gave that clap and noticed that the official Holtkamp was in place and the whistle was getting ready to go to the mouth, he knew exactly that a technical foul was imminent because of this clapping and fist pumping, I should say, also, which is another action by players against an official, that he knew it was coming. So in his turning around and walking away, he gives a clap again of that same nature, as if it's his normal action to extend his arms and clap that way to demonstrate it's just a normal thing. It's not directly at you. But Chris is a very high intellect basketball player. He's a gifted and talented guy, and he is mentally way up on the scale when it comes to this ball game. And he knows exactly what he's doing all the time. The problem is he seems to at times not want to get in lane with knowing that he should not do certain things, and he ends up doing it, and he ends up creating these conflicts. And he's a nuisance kind of person with continual complaining, by the way, which is another respect for the game guideline, that if you continually complain and then finally given a warning, this next time you say something, it's automatic. These kind of things, he doesn't want to get in the box with it. He always wants to play on the perimeter, and he gets in trouble.
And again, just so we're clear, he fouled him. He hammered him. Riddick hammered him. And so that shouldn't have been any kind of reaction. But we have a history between Lauren Holtkamp and Chris Paul. Almost a year ago to the day, there was a quote that Chris Paul told us about how, slightly out of context, he sort of said, this might not be for her.
Someone was ridiculous. Like the tech that I got right there was ridiculous. I don't care what nobody say. I don't care what she say. That's terrible. Yeah. There's no way that can be a tech. We try to get the ball out fast every time down the court. Yeah. And when we did that, she said, and I said, why, and she gave me a tech. Okay. That's ridiculous. Yeah. If that's the case, then this might not be for her.
The question is, when you're talking about things that he might have said a year ago, those kind of have to, they build up like calluses, right?
They build up, and what they do is the official doesn't bend, but he becomes less accessible. And I am sure there's three guys that came into the game knowing that the Clippers have complainers with the leader of that pack, Chris Paul. You will be finding less interaction because people become very focused and funneled on their work. They don't want to get involved with the conversations because it doesn't help the situation. Mm-hmm. If you have intermittent conversations from time to time, it's good working order to have that in the game. You're working because of the human element. But if you are a constant complainer and crying wolf, people want to back away. It's not that Lauren Holmkamp is thinking about what's done in the past. She's worrying about getting in the beehive somewhere with him again when she could be using more avoidance techniques. And in this case, obviously she couldn't. She was right in the beehive with him on that foul. But going back a year, she especially because she's new, wants to make her calls. She's going to make mistakes on calls, but she doesn't need the social situation to occur. And when I've had recently hired officials work for me as a crew chief, I would tell coaches, leave the person be. They're okay. Let them work. Allow them to work because they're trying to make a transition from the minors to the majors. And it takes a little bit of time. And also, by the way, there is no comparable place to learn this except when you finally get to the NBA. There's another level of this situation. So you have another, you're on the first level of a step again. And you got to get used to personalities, physicalities, bursts out of a conversation you may have by a player, like in the heat of the moment actions. All these things you're trying to absorb as a younger official in the league.
Well, let's take a step back and look at this from a Clippers standpoint overall to wrap up. And that is that even though you mentioned that Chris Paul is sort of the ringleader of getting on the officials, I think it goes up even one step higher, and it kind of starts with Doc Rivers, the head coach. I'm not dropping a bombshell or any kind of breaking news when I tell you that, the Clippers complain on virtually every call that's made, almost every one, in a very histrionic, very emotional, very visual way. And so the concern has to be, and they mentioned this a little bit on the broadcast last night, is that you're going to create an environment where the referees are coming in and they're going to have either a short whistle and they're not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Now, do you think that that's the reality of the situation, or does it feel like they're going to be able to come in with a clean slate when the playoffs start?
No, I think they're always on the clean slate. They really, really are. I was always on the clean slate, even with people I had difficulty working with. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I probably began to do, along with many officials, is try to avoid conversation because it becomes a bad working environment, and you avoid people. I don't think they slant, but for example, if you have someone that's telling you something that's true, you want to hear it because players can help you and coaches can help you by bringing out something that's going on in the game that maybe we as a crew are not seeing. But when you are always doing that, and Doc comes out of, Doc is a very verbal guy, very bright guy. He's in the, he's out of the class of Hubie Brown, for example, where Mike Fratello and Rick Pitino, Doc Rivers, Jeff Van Gundy, who did it a lot less, I think, at times. But these are verbal coaches. They're verbiage. They're constantly interacting. And when you're officiating, it becomes a deterrent to your thinking. It will throw you off, and you need a certain amount of distance from that talk. And so if Doc is leading that with also Mike Woodson on the side with him, those guys, get on officials from time to time, and you know what happens when you're the leader of a group, the group will follow that type of thing. But when you also have a person like Chris Paul, who is a coach on the floor, I mean, this adds to their situation, and I think they're one of the more technical foul issued teams in the entire NBA.
They absolutely are. I mean, this season alone, they have 3 players in the top 10, and that's no other team has that. And part of the reason why they're lower than they would be is because Blake Griffin's missed a bunch of games. I suspect he'd be higher. So, whether or not you think it's fair, I suppose, is one way to look at it, because we've seen players who get the short end of the stick. J.R. Smith will get a tee a lot faster than another player, for instance, because of the agitation. Perhaps Matt Barnes as well. It's just sort of like, I think people, aren't going to get up in arms on that. They kind of say, okay, that's how it is. And so I think the other issue here from a coaching standpoint is, okay, you get the fair shake, that's fine, but when you allow the culture to be so obsessed and frustrated with the perceived, people against you, then that's not when you're playing at your best. And I think that that's what we've seen. We've seen that in the past before with them destructing down the stretch. And why add a whole other layer of agita and distraction, when you have to deal with playing the other team that's so darn good?
That is very well said. And I'm sure when the huddles occur or when the halftime talks occur, it's about focus on what we are trying to do. And by the way, that halftime huddle and those timeout huddles for the referees are the same thing. Let us be concerned about what we must do. Let's avoid situations until they don't allow us to avoid it and we have to address it. So these are the kind of things that teams do not need to get into, because referees, first and foremost, are going to make mistakes. Some are going to be lower than the scale that they should be on any given night. And of course, the better you are, the less incidences you have. But these are the things they're trying to get better at. And if you start including some other social service or issues, it takes away from their performance. It takes away from your performance. And then you have these disciplinary things that go on to manage the game.
Absolutely. Well, Ronnie, you tipped the scales today. You were completely mistake-free in our episode, so I can't thank you enough for bringing this vital insight into what I hope Clipper fans will start to understand, and perhaps it'll permeate into the Clippers organization. And I just want to watch them throw those alley-oops and score on teams with beautiful footwork and passing and stop guys on defense. If they could just put away the other stuff, we'd be in good business.
Yeah, I think it's good for everybody. Get focused on what you have to do. Have a sense of latitude in terms of working with people. I think today is a day, whether it's on or off the court, you're always trying to work, for the most part, diplomatically with people. And that was always my mantra. I always wanted to work with people because I'm not always right, and I don't want to profess to be. But I am firm and fair and approachable. And I always led my staff to be that way.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And sports fans, please take these words to heart because they're really important to understand as we go forward toward the playoffs. And don't forget, sports fans, at BBallBreakdown, we're not a channel, we're a conversation. You in? You in, Ronnie?
I'm in, Coach. Glad to be with you again.